Go. Hello, hello. Good morning, depleted forces, and welcome back to the World Whisky and indeed Mezcal Forum. Yeah. How's everybody's head? Yeah. Good. Yeah. That was a good night. It's always nice just kind of sitting quietly on occasion at evenings like that and just listening to the room and just the noise and the hubbub and the conversations. It was kind of shows that things are working, or whiskey and mezcal are working anyway. So thanks for managing to make it today. I know some people are going to have to slope off relatively early, including one of our speakers, but let's get started on today's session. So we're going to be talking about communication. So really important, and we've talked about practicalities. What distilleries can do. About supply chains, etc. But actually, how you communicate to the consumer is vitally important. How to avoid greenwashing, incredibly important as well. And as I said in kind of the opening remarks, we've got to be conscious of not just talking to ourselves. It was great, that hubbub last night of everybody talking to each other about matters, whiskey, etc. But we can't be isolated. We can't just be talking to ourselves constantly. We've got to look at what's happening in the wider world because it's affecting the wider world. So it was important. I thought that in this session we had people from out with the whiskey industry coming in and talking about this vitally important area of communication. And who better to start than Joanna Watchman, who's the founder of Content Comms. So she's working with Carbon Conscious Brands. She's the author of the Anti. There we are. We have it. You even get one. Get one.
Some of you.
The Anti-Greenwash playbook. And she's working with a whole number of firms, whether they're large or whether they're small, explaining and guiding them through this essential and very complex subject. Joanna, over to you.
Oh, well, now I've got to work out if I know how to use this, haven't I? Which is the, it does it for me. I don't think I even did that. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm so pleased most of you have gone home. I've been sitting there quietly, absolutely sort of bricking myself, I think was the phrase. I don't know if that translates into other countries, but yes, so I've been kind of keeping quiet, not asking too many questions because I thought they might be too geeky. I was a bit overexcited at the Vestas top man being here because I spent a lot of my time in the energy sector, so that was an extraordinary honour, and I don't know whether it kind of translated into the crowd what an extraordinary opportunity that was to see somebody at the top of their game in that space. So just a little bit about me and why I'm here. There's me doing a bit of field work. For any of you who've been to the Scottish borders and been to the fantastic whisky shop owned by Mr. Forty in Duns, that's me who knows nothing about whisky. I can't possibly come here and patronise you as an audience pretending that I know something about your topic. I really don't. I'm a casual consumer, however. But I do two things really, or possibly three. So I have a business which is primarily working business to business, so I hope that phrase translates into all languages here. But primarily working business to business, either working with people who make things, so they might be a manufacturer, or even they might be a really big manufacturer. They might be an artisan brand. So I'd imagine that is no different to people in this room. And I've spent time with people working for really big brands that I've seen in the supermarket and ones who are sort of starting out or, barely got a bottle in their hands. So completely different ends of the spectrum. And I tend to work with those companies to help them to say things more effectively about their sustainability communications. And sometimes I've not heard this phrase here at all. We'll pick this up later. It's now called ESG, so the environmental, social and governance goals. Now, for those of you working, I can see one here, but I don't know all of you, working in bigger businesses, some of you might be, I know we've got some Diageo people here, but bigger listed companies, you will have somebody in your management structure sitting above you who is saying, we need to talk about ESG, and we'll come back to that because we have some vocabulary issues, I think, in the sustainability space. So I try to help companies work out who the audiences are that they need to be talking to. The stakeholders is that annoying word. I hate those words, but I'm afraid we have to use them. But it's about finding the audience, what's important to the audiences and what do we need to say. So that's kind of one side of what I do. I also work with lots of companies who are selling into businesses like yours. They might be pump companies and technology companies, lighting companies, but they will all be companies that can deliver some kind of sustainability outcome for the end customer. So that's the other thing. Just as a little kind of side thing, which I think was interesting, because we're at Stauning and it is the most extraordinary building. I also, a few years ago, set up a website called workinmind.org, which is all about the connection between the built environment and human physical and mental health. And we don't have the time and space for me to do that, do the presentation on that. But there is an interesting thing, because I was looking at the architect kind of design spaces at Stauning on the tour, and I think I asked Louise about this, or somebody, and it's really interesting, actually, and this does fit into sustainability. It's all about people. There is a massive connection between how people perform, how people feel, how people's health works in spaces that are designed with people in mind. And I can tell every inch of it that Stauning has that. And I applaud you for it. And it does fit into sustainability, because sustainability is about people. I promise you I'm not going to do a stack of slides that have annoying bullet points on it, because that's not cool. But there are a couple. So the sorts of things that I might do in an average week, I guess, or an average month, might be to look at sort of sustainability and the environmental social governance goals and drivers and trends, and try and help companies to understand how that might affect their ability to sell something, how it might affect their ability to even exist in 10, 20 years' time. And I'll give you an example of that in another sector in a minute. I'm very conscious that I know nothing really about the kind of the consumer end of the market that so many of you deal with, and I'm not going to start patronising the marketeers in the room who do. But you know as well as I do that younger generations are changing how we do things, and I can tell you that there are other sectors who are absolutely beside themselves with concern at that shift in attitudes, and the Gen Zs, the millennials, you know, their behaviours and their attitudes towards sustainability and sustainability trends are very different indeed. So helping companies to understand that, and I think that's something all of you need to kind of be tuned into. Something I'm very interested in, particularly because of the work I do in the built environment, so sort of, you know, you could call that construction, but we'll call it, you know, all of this stuff, is materials and product transparency. So what the hell goes into products? What makes up your supply chain? Who's in it? How transparent is it? Sustainable manufacturing, I absolutely love. If anybody wants to invite me to a distillery tour, please do. My idea of a good day out would be to go and see a factory, or anything, anywhere where you make something, because there are often hidden stories around sustainability in those spaces, and I think it takes sometimes an outsider to come in and say, you do realise that this could be contributing to your sustainability story. And I know, where is he, Brendan? There he is. He foxed me. You were there yesterday. But you raised a point yesterday about stuff you're doing where you work, which had delivered some, was it 20% energy outcomes? I'm so sorry. I told you I wasn't listening. I was like, I'm sorry, I've 50%. But, you know, things like that, if your marketing team knew, I don't know whether they do, we can come back to that later, but if they knew about that, and they should, that sort of thing could be fed back up into your sustainability reporting as a business, and you should be made the kind of the hero figure in your business. So that's an important thing. Oh, I just realised what I said. Right. So I don't know any of you. Now I'm starting to insult one of you. So okay. Or the other thing, of course, and it's something I feel very passionately about, and I can give you a bit about, is greenwash. It's really difficult when you're in marketing. It's particularly when you're on my side of the fence and you're not working in-house, and Kieran, who's going to come talk to you in a minute, does work in-house. He's in the brand, he's working in the company. And the reason that greenwash is so difficult, for those of you, I don't know how well that phrase kind of translates, but really, is there anybody here who doesn't sort of understand or feel familiar with the phrase greenwash? It's okay if no, good, okay. Because I decided to just do a little piece of content, really, write a little book, which we published as an ebook. We're a very small consultancy, you know, we're not doing big stuff, but this has been downloaded, you know, 1,000 times or so by serious brands and people, because I felt that it was really challenging for marketeers, both in-house, out-of-house, and people running businesses, to work out how to, I think, be bold about the things they want to say and how to feel comfortable about being honest about where they're at in their sustainability journeys. And there was something else, which is nothing to do with this industry or even my normal spaces, but I don't know if any of you remember, there was a dreadful, terrible fire in London, Grenfell fire. And what happened was that, you know, people died in a building. It was shocking, to 70 people. And one of the big things that came out of that, and there's been a very long inquiry, which if you read it is shocking. But one of the things that came out of that is that there should have been more questions about the things that the things that were in the building. And there was so much missing data, missing information, misinformation, information that wasn't right, correct. And it was from seriously big companies. A lot of them are national brands. And it spurred me, you know, sometimes you see something which shocks you so much that you think, I have to do my tiny part to make a difference. And I decided to write this little book, which, as I say, I'm pleased has been probably why I'm here. Nobody's told me why I'm here, but I said to somebody the other day, I ignored the first email from Jan for 3 weeks because I thought it was spam, and then he chased me, and I thought, no, it isn't. But it spurred me into action to write this because I think that had there been greater transparency and a greater commitment to honesty in that situation, maybe that event would not have happened. So it was a spur on, and it is relevant here. So as I've said to you, I absolutely can't and won't be talking about your topic because I have no preconceptions about it. But what I wanted to do was really just to pick up again on some of those musings about kind of where we're at on sustainability. I think vocabulary, I'm interested in that, and I think Dave, I'm sure you'll pick up on that in the questions. There are some real issues around vocabulary that we need to use. Comparing apples with apples, I could have chosen, I don't know, whiskies with whiskies, couldn't I? But comparisons, you know, I've sort of thought about one. Dave encouraged me to try and bring together maybe an example or two from other sectors that you guys would, you know, it's just outside of your sphere, but it would show you that other people in other arenas are really struggling with preconceptions about what is a sustainable product. We'll go back to the kind of the messaging in this little greenwash playbook, and I do have some copies. I just got as many as I could in my bag before I left London the other day. And then I think the key thing, the summary at the end will be to kind of the takeaways of my big kind of manifesto to you is, and the provocation really is to ask better questions and encourage your consumers to ask better questions. So I would imagine, for those of you that are still awake, I can see there's a couple of, you know, sort of struggling with the fresh air at the back, but this kind of drives me forward, this phrase. This came from Forbes.com. If anybody ever reads business press, Forbes is just a fantastic place to read content that really helps you to understand complex topics in a very accessible way. They write beautifully. But for me, this is everything. You know, sustainability hasn't always been the thing that I've done for a living, but it turns out that it always was. So I started off doing something else quite entirely, kind of comms around energy and environment and things like that. But now we all talk about sustainability. But there's absolutely sure that as consumers kind of get younger, all types of consumers, people in business, the decision makers, things are changing, attitudes are changing, and you know that, and that is why this is the theme of your event, and it is why you are here and listening, for those of you that are still here today. So the thing about vocabulary, I just want to touch on. So the theme of your event is sustainability, and that's quite right. But I suspect that for some of you, as I say, in larger businesses, larger distilleries, you will be hearing your colleagues in marketing, or some of you will be here. I know Kieran and I have had this conversation yesterday or today. You will be hearing the three letters ESG, so environmental, social, and governance goals. You might also still be hearing something about corporate social responsibility. The question that you often get asked is, are they all the same? Well, I think there's bits of the same within all of them. But usually, what I kind of how I kind of try and explain it is that ESG, which is a thing that I'm convinced that most of you are going to get asked about at some point, particularly if you are selling perhaps into big distributors, supermarkets, you're getting that pull through of information. We want information. ESG is often the things that can be measured around sustainability, okay? But sustainability, I think of and sort of CSR to some extent, but it's a wider thing. It could be well-being, health and safety, equality and diversity, all sorts of other things. Sometimes those things you just can't measure. It's a way of thinking. I don't know, because I made a point, really, whilst I did do some reading up, because that would have been idiotic not to, I don't have too many ideas about how many businesses in here would ultimately be owned and listed on the stock exchange. Diageo? I don't know. Yeah. So, but there are, if you are selling your product into a business that is listed and has shareholders, if you are a business that has shareholders, divestment, taking money, the investors taking money out of those businesses that they don't feel comfortable and confident in because of your sort of sustainability creds, that is real. It is happening, and I would urge you to be kind of aware of that. And I'm very conscious, because I don't know any of you ones I've spoken to well enough. Some of you will be sitting there thinking, oh, for God's sake, this is just like, it's not my thing, it doesn't matter. At some point, it's quite likely that this will pull through the system. Somebody will say to you, well, if you want to sell to our company that then sells on to major supermarkets, I'm sorry, but, you're going to have to sort this out. You have to measure this, manage that, report on this. So just be kind of aware, and they'll be doing that because there's something higher up the food chain. A lot of what I do, weirdly, having had the top man from Vestas here, is in the energy sector. I spent 13 years working for a very agency side, but for a very large brand, which is Siemens. If anybody's German here will know all about Siemens. One of the best companies in the world, in my opinion. But out of that kind of experience, I spent a lot of my career working with topics around energy. So, and the big thing right now is energy resilience. So, at the moment, there has never been a time when volatility of the energy markets has been worse. It's in a horrible state. You've already had 45 minutes on that the other day, so I'm not going to talk to you about. But what I would say to you is that operational efficiency, so anybody here who makes, you're making your product, you will need, we've already had this conversation, but you will need to be thinking about business resilience. All of these factors are affecting your company, and it feeds back into sustainability. The consumer side of it, again, we have somebody here who actually is going to be talking to you about, who will be an expert on marketing consumers. And I don't kind of claim to kind of lay that space. What I do know is that climate change is, if you look at surveys, Deloitte's, I look at, the big consulting firm, they do a fantastic Gen Z and a millennial survey, separate sets of data. I think 24 and 25% respectively of those surveyed in that recent 2022 survey cited climate change as the biggest concerns on their mind. You know, young people worry about this stuff. They could be your staff, they could be your consumer. And then we go back to the green claims. This is a UK stat, so please bear this in mind. Up to 40% of claims made that are green claims are thought to be misleading. That is not some nonsense piece of statistic. The Competition and Markets Authority in the UK has made that calculation, and they are very, very concerned about it. So that is something to be very kind of aware of. I was very conscious that I think I said to somebody on the coach on the day one, I'm wondering whether this whole sustainability theme is going to be about the E on the wall, the environment. But actually, I've heard other people talking about the other pillars. But, you know, it's really important for all of you to be aware that when you're talking to your stakeholders, your customers, your business customers, your end consumer, there are other elements to sustainability. I'll get out of the way so the chap can take a photograph. Please don't make me in it. So environment for lots of businesses is the really big one. I mean, I spend a lot of my time working with a company I'll talk about in a minute who make 1 billion bricks a year. They're the biggest manufacturer in the UK by volume. And for them, the environment and the carbon bit is everything. But for your business, it might be something else, actually. It might be that the people element is it. It might be that you want to play a part in your communities. We talked that Alex Bruce's presentation was excellent. You know, I really enjoyed, he's not here, is he? But, you know, that focused on the sort of things that really should be kind of under the communities. And innovation, you know, product. What can you do with the product and your supply chain? I'm not going to go through all of these and kind of think that you can't read for yourselves, but I think it's important that you all kind of have a sense of if you were going to undertake what they might call what they would call a materiality analysis, the things that are important in your business from a sustainability. Oh, you are there. I just saw him. You could have smiled. God, dear, oh dear. So I was so nice to you on the bus the other day and everything. It's just like I left you with the bar bill. But so there are these four areas. So from an environment perspective, you know, decarbonisation, taking carbon out of your processes is everything. But you know, there are other areas too. I've put regeneration in there twice, both under environment and communities, because I think that must be. I mean, I'd had a chat to Dave a week or so ago, and actually sort of rethinking how, you know, spaces can be used, how you can put investment into the places where you are operating is everything. So the communities, I would have thought, in your industry, the C is absolutely it, because particularly for your Scottish stakeholder, you know, the people here with the Scottish distilleries, I'd have thought that was probably one of the greatest impacts. And that sort of storytelling, that capturing the information and impact needs to feed into however you do your marketing. And I realise that for those of you with smaller brands or startup, you're not necessarily going to have, you know, some of you will have marketing people, some of you will be doing the HR, the PR, the marketing, the finance, you know, you'll be doing it all, and probably got, you know, polishing a still or something, I don't know. But the point is that somehow that needs to translate upwards. The people side of it, clearly, what your kind of attitudes to investment in people needs to be captured and that story told as well. So for lots of companies who make stuff, you know, so it could be about training and opportunity. So we've already touched on that. There was a presentation that kind of covered that yesterday. Well-being in the workplace. I mean, I would have thought at Stauning, you know, that's a big thing. They've created a space. People want to come to work. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to work in there? But, you know, things like that, again, that information can be captured and fed and that story told. You know, don't think these things are outside of sustainability. Innovation, sometimes people kind of rename this sort of part of the column, but I guess this is about your product. And I guess for you, there may be things that you simply can't do or you can't change. But I was really interested. There were a couple of questions, as Kathy and somebody else, late in the sessions yesterday about casks and timber and supply. And I think this is all about blue sky thinking, potentially. What happens if we can't get the timber? What happens if? And I think having to innovate, that phrase about, necessity is the mother of invention, or the other way around, or I can't even remember. Anyway, forget that one. But it's all about having, you might just need to innovate, and actually that is part of the sustainability process. But sometimes that blue sky thinking, sitting down, I'm doing this with a listed business back in the UK at the moment. They have something which is called a future products group. And we sit down, and we all come from different disciplines, and I'm the external person. And we sit and imagine 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and will we still have a business? Will they still have a business? Because actually, they might not. If they don't change and rethink and innovate hard, then there may be failure. And I think it's really important. And I did say, met Kathy very briefly at your drinks thing last night, and I said I felt that for me probably was the question of the day, because there was a what if, and there was a provocation really to try and get that answer. And I think for your industry, I would urge you to consider that and consider it hard. So, are we comparing apples with apples? I mean, I talked to Dave the other day. I was paranoid about talking to a specialist audience when it's not my thing. But you know what? Lots of sectors have challenges around preconceptions about products. Okay, and I mean, so for you, it might be that you think people make a judgment about peat. I don't know. So there are things where perhaps your consumer has a view, and it's a long-held view, and perhaps it is an incorrect view. And as producers, as people in the sector, as writers, journalists, influencers, whatever, it's your job to try and educate. Think of yourself as the BBC: inform, educate, entertain. If you're Dave, you can do all of those things, I'm sure. Some might not do the final bit. But other sectors have problems too, and I thought I'd just give you a little example, because Dave said, would you talk about this? So I spend an awful lot of my time working with my big brick company, and there is a big misconception that bricks are dirty, filthy things. The clay comes out of the ground somewhere in, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire, and Midlands and UK. It's baked at, 11, 1200 degrees. You're using loads and loads of gas to do that. And architects are that's our gateway to specification. That's the gateway to making money, selling more bricks, because architects need to specify the product. But the problem is that these young millennials, oh no, they don't like the idea of, a gas-fired kiln. They don't like the idea of heat and dirt. But actually the truth is that in embodied carbon with the bricks, it's not quite so bad when you look at it and you think, well, compare it to the glass and the steel. And then you go around, I look in London and see the high-rises. Guess what they're made of? They're not made of bricks. So there are some misconceptions, and there is a lot of work going on in our industry, my normal job, which is around trying to educate the market, the specifier, the middle person. So in your world, perhaps that's, the distribution networks, whoever is sitting in the middle. You really need to take ownership, everybody, of that, because if you feel that there are things which are utter nonsense about how people perceive your product, you have got to own it. You need to absorb that, and you need to think, how can I help them to ask better questions? How can I help them to ask me what the truth is? What can I do to educate? So I just want to go through a few points which really, I think, were are sort of covered in here. And as I say, I've got a few of these that people can take away. One of the things it's really good to do is to have some sense of progress, and you need to baseline, you need to measure kind of where you're at with sustainability. Lots of things need to be measured. We talked yesterday, it all started to get a bit techie, and as we're dealing with people from different countries here, I don't think it helps to kind of to get too down and dirty in the how we do what, because different places do different things. But I've put the phrase here, we're all on a journey. One of the things you can do is to have some kind of roadmap in place, so you have some sense of where you need your journey to be, and perhaps to stretch that, let's say between now and 2030. You know, you've got one in your, you know, Scottish Whisky Association 2040 for net zero, is that right? Yeah, I do know something. Read that one. But it's very important that you don't kind of hide away from where you're at. And if I had a fiver, you know, £5 note for those of you, for every time, as particularly smaller companies, and I've spoken to lots of smaller brands here, a smaller company said to me, yeah, well, we were thinking about doing something on sustainability on our website, but we've decided not to. And you say, well, why did you decide not to? Well, we're just worried because we haven't really got very far, actually. Well, do you know what? That is also valuable. It's important to say, you know, we are doing something, and it's the doing something that's important. So don't hide, you know. It's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to be on the pathway. It's okay to be on that journey. And incremental improvements matter. I think, again, I'm not a B2C marketeer by trade, you know, that's not really my big thing. But I do know that for your world and my world, authenticity is absolutely everything, and particularly with your younger consumers. If you don't know how to present your business and your brand in a way that is authentic, for heaven's sake, find somebody who can help you. There are so many good communicators out there who will be specialists. Ask your compadres, ask people here, you know, just find ways to tell your story in a way that actually is all about authenticity. So we have to really apply some scrutiny to the facts and the figures. If somebody tells you something about something in your processes, something in your distillery, please apply some scrutiny to that. Because if you don't, it has potential to kind of come and smack you on the face later on. I think there is also an important thing to tell you about failure, and perhaps sometimes embracing that. And don't be frightened of starting some kind of sustainability journey and thinking, oh, we're not going to get there. We're not going to meet our targets. Actually, if you're setting your targets, you're somewhere on that journey, you're reporting on progress. Actually, even if you miss it, whatever, you're still on the pathway, aren't you? You're still saying, well, I'm giving up smoking by Christmas, and I've got it down to one a day. But you're still cutting your nicotine. I made a comment, yes, about you're not alone. You aren't alone. There are plenty of ways to get help and support. Do talk to people, listen. You don't need to tackle a lot of this big stuff alone, whether you're a small business or a really large business. But I think the really important thing is to work with your suppliers. So if you have somebody here who's supplying you maybe a cask, or I spoke to the nice man about yeast. Thanking you. Thank you very much. So we've got Kathy, and there was Alan the yeast man somewhere. Is he gone home? Yeah, he was. Oh, he is. There he is. So I said chat to both them. Now, I asked Alan actually. It is Alan, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Thank heavens. Otherwise, that's going to be on the video forever. So I asked Alan about whether you're getting questions about sustainability from your side, and you said you are, and that's particularly from the bigger customers. So actually demanding information is coming up through the supply chain. Work with your suppliers, your partners. Never see somebody as the enemy. Ask them for information, put some pressure on, make sure you get your eyes on the data. And as I say, apply scrutiny, you know, ask questions. And I think ask good questions, you know, really kind of unpick everything that is in front of you. And I think the really important thing there is to invest time and effort to educate all of your stakeholders, particularly your end customers. I think people want to make informed choices, and you keep talking, I've heard of the conversations about packaging, but you know, if there was a choice, if you made it clear to your consumer that actually choosing the one without the box, well, you know, you can wrap this one up easier, but you know, perhaps more needs to happen to educate the consumer. And I would just say to you that even with the really big companies that I work with, I don't think anyone's really there yet, because the goalposts keep changing and things keep moving on. So don't get too smug, but also don't get down in the dumps. I think there's lots of reasons to be very positive. I'm not a sustainability kind of, you know, I'm not a big kind of greenie particularly. I'm a business realist. I'm like Tommy from Vestas. It's all about business. You know, can you deliver operational efficiency, bottom line benefit? Yes, we're doing good things too, but there are business reasons to do these things. But I suspect that lots of people are worried that they're just kind of, you know, it's once you're done, you're done. I think the goalposts will keep changing. Just conscious time, so this kind of little summary really is contained in the Greenwash playbook, but it summarizes everything I have just said to you, and you can all read, but I will read it for you. So final kind of point really, with your marketing and your stakeholder marketing, be authentic, be accurate, truthful and human. I think that's a really important thing. Don't sit on your high horse talking down to people. Make things accessible, be honest, be transparent. And I think if you do those things, I think you will make life a lot easier for yourselves, regardless of the audience. So I think that's probably it. But if there's any questions, you know, we'll chat later or whatever.
Great. Joanna, thank you so much for that. A huge amount to take on board there, guys. And as per usual, there'll be questions later, but grab her, you know. In fact, I sincerely hope you get some new clients as a result of that. It's really, really important. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. It was advertised as being Peter Kreiner from NOMA, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. So at very, very short notice, I collared Kieran. So Kieran Healy-Ryder from White Mackay is stepping in, which is absolutely perfect because it's good to have somebody from the whisky industry actually responding. Kieran has got the wonderful title of the Global Head of Whisky Discovery. So there we are. So I hope you've discovered some things over the past couple of days. And he's in charge of the sustainable strategy and communications, and he's a passionate advocate. I mean, a lot of the initiatives that Greg was talking about that White Mackay are doing are really kind of groundbreaking, and for a larger company, really kind of re-engaging with community as well. So, Kieran, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Just to respond to some of the things that Joanna said first, I mean, I think we don't have the answers, and that's okay. Diageo and I sit on a lot of meetings together, and Diageo don't have all the answers. Glass is probably the biggest issue that we talk about as an industry, and yet we haven't got all of the answers solved. So I think from a Joanna point of view, that's spot on. Today, I just really wanted to share with you our vision, our experience of what we've gone through. I'll be quite quick, I think, but there's a lot of slides, mainly for the people at home, actually. I wanted to make certain there was things to read. For me, we have an opportunity in this room to be really powerful. I genuinely believe there are about 50 of us here today. We will probably interact with another 10 people before we make it home, minimum. So that's 500 people. That's 500 opportunities for you to go and to take the stories that you've learned here in Stauning to help affect change. And as whiskey makers, we're all in unique position of working in communities, whether you're in a city or whether you're in an island or in the Highlands, you're in a community. You're most likely, thinking about Rassi, Jura, many other examples, you're most likely to be the biggest employer in your community. So it's not just important that we get sustainability right for our whiskey making, but it's important for the communities where we make our whiskey too. This will require participation. I warned some of you. I'm aware that it's the last day. But for anyone that knows me, this is not uncommon. I want to take the opportunity to thank Ingvar and Dave particularly, but also about 20 of you that are here. I'm relatively new to Whisky, but there are 20 of you here that have helped me come in over 6 years and feel really at home, actually. So here's the challenge. One word. What one word would you associate with the gentleman on the slide behind me? Joanna. Kermie. Anyone else? Brendan? One word. I didn't hear what you said. Yeah, anyone else? Green. What about Stauning Distillery? One word. Dave? Stunning. Unanimous. What about Lego? One word. Fun, plastic. If you talk to the guys at Lego, they say it's the most sustainable toy available because it can always be reused. Discuss. What about climate change? One word. Language matters. And I think we need to say less to do more. Everything we've said today, we've all got 30 minutes to talk about. We've been talking about this for the weeks running up to it too. There are many, many, many conferences about sustainability, and Ingvar and I were chatting yesterday. There may well be another World Whisky Forum in the future that's about sustainability, but language absolutely matters. So today I've got 5 things too, so rhythm of 5. Briefly talk about values, the consumer, the audience, the story, the voice, but the power of the people in the room. My name is Kieran Healy-Ryder, so I'm the Global Head of Whisky Discovery, which is a very fluffy title for someone that's not very fluffy, but I would tell you what I do. I am in charge, really, of our corporate storytelling, so I work across our portfolio, but primarily on the Dalmore. So I speak to a lot of people about the whiskey we make. I do the facts. I don't do the creative side of marketing, but I really talk to people about how we make whiskey, why we make whiskey in the way that we do. And that's the kind of work I've always done. So it's nice for me to come back to Scotland after a while away and be doing that again for a whiskey maker that's kind of just growing. We've doubled in size in 5 years. It's a great place to work. But as you grow, and most of you are talking about doubling every year, as you grow, so the complexity comes, and so the choices come, and the ability for you to make decisions with a small team is harder because you're a big team and everyone has an opinion, which is nice, but not all opinions are valid. And we're growing very quickly. We are also changing. If you're in the UK or if you look at us in Carrefour, you will see a blended whiskey called John Barr. You'll see in the UK White and Mackay. But we're moving our business from being a blended whiskey business to a single malt-focused business. I only work on the malts. Greg really only works on the malts too. But that generates a really big problem that I'll come on to. Here's one of our still houses. This is the Dalmore. You would not build a still house this way if you were thinking about it being the most sustainable. It is a beautiful symphony of idiosyncratic stills. This is Tam de Fulin. It was built in the 60s. It's perfect built for the perfect space side, so it's a little bit more efficient. It is our most efficient still house. And this is Feta Cairn, which Greg spoke about yesterday, and it has an external condenser, which is not efficient. And Feta Cairn, whilst it's the home of the Scotch Oak programme, Feta Cairn Forest, we're doing lots of brilliant things. We want to maintain this because it gives us that unique house style. It gives us those light tropical notes that Feta Cairn is becoming known for. So we have problems to overcome at White and Mackay if we want to deliver against what we want to do from a sustainability standpoint. This is where we are. I say we're small, and I realise, aside from my friends from Distill Ventures, we're one of the biggest companies in the room, but actually nothing you have said has not been relevant to us. Please come and see us. We don't have a sustainability strategy at White and Mackay. We don't. Sustainability is just a part of every strategy. We have what Joanna talked about, which is our map. It's the green print. Green print's on our website. Feel free to download it, have a look. It lays out what we are trying to do over the next blocks of 3 years. Why 3 years? Because if we talk about 2030, most of my team won't be in their jobs. The market will have changed. government would have changed, environmental targets would have changed. So we've started to break down our map into smaller chunks of time to make it easier for us to navigate. Our purpose as a business is about building community and connection. That's what we believe we do, and that's primarily driven by the fact that each of our distilleries is more or less in quite a remote place. They're often, very similar to Rassi's story yesterday, we are always the biggest employer in the area, and most of the areas are quite small. Our head office is in Glasgow, but there aren't that many of us in Glasgow. So language matters, and it really matters with sustainability. It can be seen to be in the distance. People in our generation, 40 and above, one of the biggest challenges is people have a habit of saying, it won't affect me, I will be. And that's a problem. And the problem for communication is to make it feel more immediate and need urgent action. This is a European fashion report which talks about greenwashing. I don't want to talk about greenwashing, but what I do want to leave you with a thought is, for me, action in the green space is meaningless unless it's connected to who you are and why you are. So for Agitator, clearly making whiskey in a unique and interesting way and addressing sustainability in a unique and interesting way, that feels totally connected. Fashion, not so much. A tool, this is available on the website. So if language matters, let's start at the very top. The UN Development Goals are broadly available in every market. They are adopted by every country in this room. And it's a great place to start to frame what is your sustainability strategy. And Annabelle talked about the B Corp registration process. That's a distillation, of this. We've done it into 4 blocks, and you do generally find all whiskey makers have taken all of the development goals and broken them down into 4 blocks. But number 11 is about community. The world has acknowledged that community needs to be a part of sustainability. So when we talk about common measurement, as we did yesterday, let's start with common language. If you haven't got this in your appendix of your sustainability strategy, stick it in. Make sure everything you're doing relates back to this global plan. It's pretty straightforward. Language also matters because we're incredibly lazy, busy, and anyone that works with me, very easily distracted. If you had 30 seconds to pitch your business, or 30 seconds to speak to the head of your government, or 30 seconds to speak to a whiskey writer at a whiskey show, what would you say? If you just had 30 seconds, you couldn't do a 30-minute, 20-slide presentation. So it's really important that we boil down what we want to say from a sustainability standpoint to say less. And it matters commercially too. So in chain retail, where we're all, we're friends today, but we're competing tomorrow. But on the shelf, we only have the space of a pack or a bottle to communicate our message. In whiskey, we're really good at boiling down our communication to a line that fits on the pack. In sustainability, we are not. So there's a discipline about how we approach chain retail that can help us in sustainability. And Dave said it yesterday, I absolutely do not believe anyone in this room should be putting their green strategy on their pack. I think Annabelle's done a really great job. It looks green and sustainable. It shows you that it's green and sustainable. It doesn't tell you that it's green and sustainable. So 30 seconds. These are our values, and that informs our choices. And it feels really important today that whilst I'm stood here, we've got a colleague in Kyiv. And actually, we're facing a lot of complex situations as business, and the Ukraine is only the latest, probably the most severe complex situation that we're facing as businesses. And values really matter. So for us, I always say the best way you can see us living our values is by how we're handling our situation in Ukraine, and there are lots of examples in the room too. But values for sustainability really matter. If you can't describe who you are, you don't need logos, you don't need a big value statement, but if you can't describe who you are and link that to what you're doing, something has gone wrong. And if you weren't there tomorrow, your business wouldn't survive. So values is really important. I talked yesterday about a few things, so I put this slide in. I am a very passionate believer in the IWSR. We, as a group, are the International Wine and Spirits Research Company. It's a private company, and then there is a membership group that some of you are in. Most of the companies that are big are in, but also there's a lot of small players too. So it's a source of data, but they also have free white papers. So look at their website, have a look. It's got some really interesting stuff. Spirits Europe, your National Association for Drink in your country will be a part of that if you're a European market. I'm sure Desiree will create the next thing for New Zealand. And then the Scotch Whisky Association, which I am a very active member of, so I was taking notes in yesterday's debate about barley and oak. But also, in your local market, you will also have a forestry commission, and this didn't get mentioned yesterday. But when it comes to the Scottish Oak Programme and to cask sourcing and tree growing and replanting, your country will have a national forestry plan, and that will dictate the type of woods that your government has decided you should be growing. So in the UK, that used to be done in London, and the forestry management in Scotland was not ever so good, and currently it's done in Scotland, and you start to see forests in Scotland have really been rejuvenated. So if you are looking at replanting, have a look at your local forestry. I have given my pitch to most of you about this, but I think it's really important that we talk together and have a shared voice, and that's why I've put these on the slide. It's not about, I'm really not that interested in the definition of whiskey, and I say that as a very, very active member of the SWA, and I'm really supportive of the English Guild as well. But I'm much more interested in this conversation because I think this is really important. You don't know what you don't know, and the chances are that someone else has solved the problem you're looking at. So I think if you are in a country that might be Ireland, might be England, might be the Netherlands, where you're starting to organise, it's like, don't worry about the definition, but worry about the conversation. And I can promise you that I would happily tell you what we do when we work together in the UK in any of these organisations. So give me a shout if you need anything. So language is important. We don't have much attention, and the planet is in danger. So how have we approached it? Most of you will know Jura. It's a very big brand in a lot of European markets. It's not that big outside of Europe. But it's our big bet after the Dalmore. The Dalmore is a huge part of our business. Jura is the next thing. The challenge is we have refined and refined and refined and refined our storytelling down to the size of one label. But nobody here has talked really about the bottle in the last 3 days. And in fact, every whiskey conference I've been to in the last 6 years, we don't really talk about the bottle. There's a whole other story that we're not really telling. We need to tell it in a short way, but the rest of the story is important too. And this is how we think about it. And I think this is applicable to the whole of industry. We talk about acorn to glass. And then after that, I realised that our master whiskey maker's name is Glass, so it worked in that way too. But from acorn to cask, that whole production process, that in our company is a team. So I can have a conversation with them, I can go and meet the people, as Joanne said, and get those stories. Cask to bottle is in our language, it's supply chain. So it's warehousing and it's distribution out across the world. Bottle to glass is sales, and whoever said it yesterday, I wish I'd had a chance to change the slide, but obviously then recycling should be happening at the end of that, and then it's circular. But to tell more of our story, we as a business are totally and utterly focused on this bit of the story. Why? Because that's what the shopper sees, but that isn't what the buyer sees, and that isn't what your family see or your local community see, and it certainly isn't what the government needs to see if your government is going to get behind what I believe, which is that we can really make a massive impact for sustainability as makers of drinks in our communities. Look at the pictures. These are our barley fields. I think they're beautiful. I think the content we create as drinks makers is some of the best content out there. Balenciaga spends millions doing fake content to create a sense of reality. We just have that on our doorstep. Look at the beautiful place we're in this week. So we have more of a story to tell, and we have better content to tell it with. It's not diminish the role of an agency, okay? We've talked a lot about measurement and what to do with it, and greenwashing at the heart of it is people that put facts and data points ahead of context and reality. It's often their enthusiasm that overtakes and causes the problem, nothing else. When I look at that whiskey journey I just had on the slide, we then put our sustainability, our footprint against it. 90% of what we need to do is that first part of the process. So we're really focused on energy. Really, really focused on energy. We're looking at hydro and duro. We've got bioenergy going into the other sites. And I can't remember who said it, but the solution is different by site, even in our company. But 90% of our task is against that first bit of the story. So that's good, because I know that first bit of the story, I know who I need to communicate that to, and I can focus the facts on that. The rest is about 4%. Packaging might be the number one thing we think a shopper cares about, but it's definitely not part of the roadmap right now. We'll get to it. These are, if you've seen me speak, these are available generally. I just want to quickly rebrief how this relates to consumers, because we're talking about sustainability, but we've got someone that lives a life, and that sustainability bit is less than 1% of their mind space. So we need to think about, when we're communicating, even to you guys today, after a evening's entertainment last night, have to think about how we engage, how we communicate in order to cut through. These are facts. The pace of change in communication is changing fast. The world is borderless. I can put an ad out now, it'll be live in China, and the Chinese team will call me and ask me what I'm doing. Digital has had the greatest impact in how we consume content, and consumers are increasingly living their life online. So they're all facts, but actually we need to navigate that if we are going to communicate our story. This is the first slide of our digital strategy at White & Mackay, and I've put it into the sustainability strategy deliberately, or the green print, because we have to, whatever we do, we will have to communicate it to someone, even if it's just internally to ourselves. As someone that's been in consumer comms for a while, the problems that we have to overcome to communicate haven't changed that much. They've got a bit stronger through COVID, but in order to communicate effectively, we need to overcome noise in consumers' lives. We have to cut through. We need to be connected. We need to make certain if they read a 10-word line or the headline of a newspaper, that they can go to your website and find the 150-word version on the website. We need to make it convenient for them to connect. So that means being available, not everywhere, but just in the places where they're most likely to be. If you think about a product review for a whiskey enthusiast, it's really important we're in Ingvar's book, because that is a book that whiskey enthusiasts are quite likely to read. And it's the same for sustainability. We need to choose the places that they're most likely to want to read about us, and it's not on the bottle. And then trust. We can't just blast it out there. And from a greenwashing standpoint, trust is really, really important. We need to connect the message that we're telling through to the reality of where people live. And I've got some examples of what we're doing in a minute. From a sustainability standpoint, I'll finish with this, I'll cover this very quickly. It's about relevance. Everything we're trying to do is framed in 3 ways, and this is your mission. And when I see you in 18 months, homework will be marked. We need to communicate sustainability in a way that's relevant to you and your family, your immediate unit of 2 or 3 or 4 people. But the challenge then is to start talking green to your community beyond that, your village, your town, your street, your apartment block, and then in society. And that's where I really, that's where I was giving our Irish colleagues a hard time about when we get one unified voice, that allows us to make meaningful change. And I'll talk to you about why that's important. If we get our communication right to the right people, we might have a chance of solving this problem. This, Ava and I were looking at last night. This is a view of tax on alcohol. Dark spirits are disproportionately taxed in the majority of markets around the world. That's our fault, in part, because we're a premium category. There is a perception at a state level that because we cost a lot, we are an avenue for tax. It's also connected to health impacts, and that's really important, not to take away from that. But there is an opportunity in most markets to have a conversation as an industry about the disproportionate tax that spirits pay versus wine, beer, and cider. It's a really big problem in the UK. Make sense? This is the UK. You can see the huge difference. The top of the chart is cider, wine, spirits in it. It's £1 in every 4. On Jura, we have started to raise our voice with government. We're trying to actively talk about what we have done, and the Rassi story is very similar. Jura is a tiny island of about 212 people, more or less. It goes up to about 260 during the summer. We employ 20 to 30 people. It's beautiful. Come and visit us. Avoid the midges. It contributes 49 million to the local economy by having a whiskey making facility on an island. It's not a tiny island, it's a tiny community. We are generating employment opportunities for 251 people. That's not tourism, this is tourism. The tourism element of it, because it is quite hard to get to, so we don't have massive ambition to get more people there. That's not going to happen. But of the people that get there, they're generating 4.4 million to their economy. And it's an additional 120 roles across Scotland, because our warehousing is in central Scotland. This is from government available data in Scotland. I've got the links. We asked Scottish Enterprise to help us to write it, but the calculations they did are publicly available. None of it's based on our actual data. It's based on the published data that's in the world. So you're not giving anything away when you tell this story. You have to tell this story to have the tax conversation, and we have to have the tax conversation because of the whiskey story from acorn to glass. We have to get to a position where people realise it's not just the bottle, because actually the impact we've seen here at Stauning and the impact all of you have talked to me about is before the bottle, and that's the benefit we can have. But if government don't appreciate that, we won't get the funding that's available for, and I'm going to say, beans and nappies. So in order for us to have a better conversation, we need to be structured in our comms. That's what we're trying to do, but my challenge to you all is to have a go too. This is us in practice. This is Amy. Amy is the daughter of Alex. Alex is the bus driver on Jura. You will have met him if you've been, and I think you do know Alex too. Amy is an environmentalist. She's also an award-winning artist based on Jura. Jura is full of creative people. It's that kind of place. Amy is very keen on finding things around the island of Jura and turning them into jewellery. She's Insta-famous, which I think is a thing. And so we've partnered with Amy to create a travel retail exclusive that brings that story to life. So it's absolutely us trying to live our values. It's connected to our community, and we've got it down to a few lines on pack. There's a lot more on the back, obviously. But just in terms of how we're really genuinely trying to live by our values, this is what we're doing. This is what White and Mackay is like now. It's not just about Scottish Oak. It's about the people in our community. And this is our latest incarnation of an ad, just to give you a break from my monotonous voice.
It takes an island to make Jura. 212 islanders who all lend a hand to make every sip as characterful, bright and lively as our tiny island community. You see, Jura is more than a whiskey. It's bottled community spirit. Jura, more than a whiskey.
I take no credit for that. But if you saw our ad 3 years ago, hands up if you saw our ad with the people. Most European markets had it. It was basically a series of people that were saying, say hello to Jura. And it featured something like 40 people saying, say hello to Jura. We then went through COVID. COVID was really tough for rural communities. So we had a conversation, and I spent 10 days on Jura recently talking to the islanders, and the brand team were there too, and the production team, around, for us, as a business that's based in Glasgow, how do we meaningfully keep our community spirit alive? If we're going to use it in our marketing, you know, what can we do more? We were doing lots already, and there is a real passion for the whiskey that's made there, but that passion exists at Fettercairn too, at Dalmore, at Invergordon. How can we go a wee bit further, and how can we work with them in a more meaningful way? And that kind of leads to projects like the Amy project, which is a bit more, you know, two-way relationship. The ad we've changed. because actually we realised that as much as our 212 people are passionate about the island, we've got like tens of thousands of people around the world that are also passionate about what we make, and you're all the same. The Stalk community, my Instagram inbox is full. I posted one post with Bastian yesterday, and I'm Stalk community from around the world are filling me in. So from a juror standpoint, we're trying to do everything I'm talking about. We're not there yet, but hopefully you can see that we're on that journey. We're really proud of, if we ask them, do you feel like we're listening, we're having that conversation, do you know what we're doing from a sustainability standpoint, you would generally get a yes, and that feels like a good place to be. My one word is joy, and Annabelle touched on this yesterday. It is possible to be green and be joyful. Yes, the world is in peril, but that doesn't mean we have to frown. From a communication standpoint, there are really 5 things I wanted to leave you with. Values. Values need to inform your action and your behaviour. Don't do what the science says you have to do, because let's be honest, government will change their mind. Net zero, carbon neutral, may well change. The date may change. The science is changing. So do what feels right based on your values, and then you'll be good. Think about who. Be single-minded about who you're looking to connect with. For me, my challenge to you is government and yourselves. But obviously the consumer cares too. And as I said yesterday, they don't care as much as we think they do. They just want to see a little bit of proof that you're working on that journey. Story, all the way from acorn to glass and beyond. I changed that slide. Recycling. And voice. There is power in this room. If you are in a market with other distillers, there is more power in you as a group telling your story to your society and your community than there is one distillery. So from a green standpoint, talk together as well as on your own. And use the good work that you're doing to inspire the people around you to go green too. Don't assume you're behind. You're probably ahead. And based on the last 3 days, I would say a few of you are definitely ahead. So share those stories too. And that was everything from me.
Fantastic, Kieran. Thank you so much. Again, thought-provoking and lots of lessons there to be learned and absorbed. Thanks a lot, and we'll get you back up. Kieran has to slope off because he's got a plane like at 11:30. So if he suddenly disappears, he's not in a huff, all right? So our final speaker, I mean, how do you introduce this man? Well, you know, if you studied fine arts, biology, and indeed philosophy, what would you become? A bartender, obviously. Yeah. You would open not just one, but you would open, well, lots of bars. Currently, Ryan Chetty has 4. One in DC, one in Amsterdam, 2 in London. One of his bars won World's Best Bar. On the night he won Best Bar, he closed it and then reopened it under a different guise. He's a deep thinker. He is a philosopher. He's a dear friend. And he's provocative. Ryan. Yeah.
I am going to, actually it's very unusual for me. If anybody has seen me speak, I tend to do it off the cuff. And I quite enjoy doing that. It's a nice way of being able to talk a little bit more frankly. But I feel like this is something really quite important. And so it's a topic that I've actually scripted out a little bit more. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Now this caveat towards all of this, this is not in any way to kind of undermine all of the amazing stories that we've heard over the last couple of days. There's been some incredible, very real, very important work that's going on, and it's been very inspiring to hear all the amazing stories. And I've got several friends who've done lots of different bits of work in the wide world of food and drink to try and find ways to kind of make it more balanced, more sustainable. But it's also been something that's frustrated me. And so what I wanted to do was kind of what Dave teed up, be a bit more provocative about how can we look at this topic. So looking at it in a slightly kind of wider context. So we're going to talk about why we need to scrap sustainability. Okay, so we're here to talk about sustainability, but I want to make a case for not doing so. And to do that, I need to go back a wee while. When I first started talking about sustainability, it was kind of actually by accident. I hadn't considered the topic, not because I didn't care about it, but because as a biologist, and actually maybe coming from a Buddhist family, it was just kind of obvious to me. It seemed like it was just something that we all had to consider. Not wasting things, considering the impact you have on kind of more than just yourself, just seemed logical to me. And I feel like that's something that's, a very universal human feeling. But I wanted to talk about innovation, and I wanted to talk about education and how different ways of thinking can help us push industries we're passionate about forwards. So the topic actually fit really neatly. Interestingly, it actually kind of fell on deaf ears the first time I did it about 12 years ago. And even in the early days of White Lion, that was our first bar that we opened in Hoxton. And it was a bar that was pretty extreme, to put it mildly. Even 10 years on, it's quite a weird bar. If any of you have ever heard of it, it was a bar that had no ice, no citrus, no brands. We made everything from our water up to our spirits, cordials, and so forth. It was an extreme version, but it meant that we didn't have any waste. We didn't stress the topic, even though it was kind of like a founding pillar of what we wanted to do at the bar. And actually, it was really a founding pillar of what I wanted to do with the company. But then all of a sudden, a Guardian article broke, and it went viral, and it thrust this idea of food waste into the mainstream. And it was super fascinating to see the reaction to this, because having done those first talks, there wasn't a huge amount where people from the trade cared about some of this topic. Actually, when I first did the talks to kind of consumers, there was an amazing response, great questions coming back, but the trade were a little bit more slow and reluctant to kind of get on board with it. But we ended up judging competitions around the world on sustainability. We helped give guidance to different sustainability awards, and we really worked on a couple of things that we saw as barriers. We helped dispel some of the myths, some of the things that we saw as kind of like stumbling blocks for people surrounding the topic. I gave a load of talks on this, and often I'd meet kind of resistance about the supposed irony of traveling around the world to talk about sustainability, or how actually it was a kind of contradiction to the fact that we work in a luxury sphere. And that, often came up the manner when I'm first talking about this, people said it didn't matter, it wasn't going to make a difference. But then big media broke on the topic. There was one too many oil spills to hide, or the infamous turtle with the straw scene kind of being promoted by Mr. David Attenborough. Then all of a sudden, every bar was dehydrating leftovers. They were making stocks and ferments. Restaurants were serving fish heads and bycatch and cooking in waste or serving cover crops. And corporations all started kind of shouting about their creds. Some of this was real, some of it was not. But the thing about sustainability was, to me, it was always a bit like charity. Sure, I'd love everybody to have kind of genuine moral intentions behind it and to really care about the topic. But actually, even if it was for a tax break or if it was something just to make yourselves look good, there was always a net positive result. To me, it always seemed kind of like positive if people were making some change, some action around it. And even the idea of hearing about sustainability started to make it feel less foreign or less weird. The more that we heard the word, the more that it started to kind of creep into the norm. But after seeing kind of political action kind of continue to fall short, and to be so lame and kind of short-sighted, I realized that we were trying to convince around the wrong thing. So some of the first work that we did, I talked about kind of like challenging, you've got derelict as a nice image on the top for it here. But it was, talking to bars and kind of getting them to think about the idea, does it make a difference? What is the fact of they can kind of include in their bars and restaurants? And so often people thought that it wasn't going to actually cause any change. And I'll come on to that kind of part about, the impact in a second. That's kind of the main focus of it. But a lot of the work that we did was trying to explore the idea of how do you just get people started? So we did some work around like very common bar ingredients, things that were, every problem was like different everywhere you went in the world, but there were certain universals. So how could we give examples? How could we give I always talk to the team about not wanting you to do their homework for them. Give them the kind of parameters and examples, kind of case studies, so then they can kind of apply their own thinking to it. And this to me was one of the most exciting things about the topic. As soon as we started getting people to think outside the box, it kind of boosted creativity on a whole. So it wasn't about kind of going, these are the solutions, simple stuff like making stocks out of mint stems, or being able to, we did all sorts with citrus. It's a mainstay of a lot of kind of cocktail bars. But all of a sudden, when we couldn't kind of get the team just going, you have to apply the decades of experience you've had in this industry to come up with a use for it. You have to think outside the box, because we're looking at solutions that we can't find parallels for in the landscape. We end up doing things like mummifying citrus, finding ways to kind of source all sorts of alternative acidulants or sweeteners, and it ended up being a wonderful spur for creativity. But a major thing that we kind of ensured we focused on was, again, this whole idea of connection. How do you talk to people about it? But crucially, how do you make sure it's still delicious? That's the thing that we can't, that's the name of our game for our world. It has to be delicious. So how could we work on a manner that still included that as a focus? And some of the things that kind of came out of it certainly weren't delicious. And that's not to again, undermine some of the work that got done, but it was always something that needed to be the point to come back to. So again, going back to this idea of trying to convince around the wrong thing. The kind of revelation I kind of came to with this was sustainability is just the wrong word. Zero waste is a myth. It's not something that exists. The fact that we are, we're not a natural system, we're not going to cycle in the same way, we will always have an output. But that shouldn't kind of be a deterrent. So climate change is a similar thing. It means nothing to the majority of people. In countries that cause most of the problems, they're buying from those 100 companies that cause all of the issues, but they see green pastures and lush lawns surrounding us. They're surrounded by a confirmation bias that tells us that all is fine. I'm going to get a little geeky on you for a second. So, reason was a trait that we developed to deal with hyper-social strategies that evolution deemed best for us. We're very social creatures. I told you as a biologist is where I go into my research on these things. So, but confirmation bias undermines this as like a design flaw. Why would you have confirmation bias when we're guided by being reasonable? As put in The Enigma of Reason, there's a great book on this by Mercier and Sperger that states, a mouse hell-bent on confirming its belief that cats don't exist would soon be dinner. And that's very much what we're doing. We are burying our heads in the sand, and we are turning ourselves into dinner. So facts don't convince us. And the facts surrounding climate change are irrefutable, but it hasn't caused a major shift. Because these tactics that we have, they were not used to check whether there was a cat or an impending doom around, but to check whether our social circle was hoodwinking us or getting us to do all the work. So it's about social status rather than it is about what's good. So the idea of looking at this topic is it's not simply about good action. That isn't sustainable. What we're doing is kind of surgery, and I can say that coming from a family of cancer specialists. Sure, sometimes that can do greatness, but all it does is kind of, and it also can help stem, obviously, major problems, but it tends to treat the symptoms. And that's what we're doing in a lot of the work that we're exploring, is we're treating symptoms. So doing good practice isn't just good enough, and it's not sustainable. The only sustainable thing that I've really come across is a restaurant that I kind of encourage you all to explore. Is a thing called Silo by Douglas McMaster in London. Doug had the world's first zero waste restaurant, and again, by his own kind of admission, he doesn't talk about it as being truly zero waste. But he's not there to kind of, he grew up in 2- and 3-star kitchens and really wanted to explore deliciousness, but he kind of went, why are we taking all of these ingredients and whittling them down to this tiny little nugget? And so his solution was not to kind of look at the waste streams and think of the outputs and, do work towards those. Yes, of course, that's important, and he does that too. But it was really about looking at the things that surround us. And we've talked a lot about upstream and downstream from our businesses. But really, he's looking to change the systems. He's looking to find a way of going, how do we work within natural systems? Those are the ingredients that we're using. And so he's finding manners to go, actually, this is something that does positive good for the world, rather than just mitigating those problematic symptoms. But this shouldn't dismay us or deter us. It should encourage us to refocus and think about kind of the social aspects that allow us to kind of play to our strengths and affect change. We're not farmers or politicians, but we are educators, and we excite people through actual magic. It's the thing that we create. Everybody in this room is creating something that is magical. It is the reason why people have fans all across the world. People visit these places. They get really excited by it. You know, a dram which marries a sense of place, land, human choices. It's alchemy as well as sheer luck and ancient insight. Or a drink that we make in one of the bars, you know, it challenges a sense of time, of space, or a passage in a poem that kind of excites us about a feeling you didn't even know how to convey from your own senses. Bars and restaurants and art and books and meeting points, they connect us and push us out of our comfort zones. They encourage us to think differently, and that's the beauty around what we create. That's the focus that we should be centering in on. So we aren't built to understand kind of magnitudes of billions or empathy struggles with things that we can't connect or relate to unless we have the luxury to do so. That's part of our biological strategy. That's the way that we work as social creatures. But it doesn't mean that we don't want to learn and we don't want to challenge the things that surround us. And the opportunity we have is to stop trying to be surgeons. So a major point that I wanted to look at is, does anybody know the example that I'm putting up on the board? It's quite a fun one from some marketing. It was really about the shift in kind of like narratives and discussions around things. So there was a major thing post-war where, you know, they discovered that cakes were very important to people. They were things that, you know, were a luxury, but there was something that showed hospitality. So it was a major thing about how to kind of help people who started to have less time, needed to be able to kind of cover a multitude of tasks. So they came up with cake mixers. And when they first launched them, they had everything in there. You'd have a cake mix, which was developed by a food scientist, can't remember his name, but it was everything in the mix. You just added water and you baked it. And it took off a certain amount, but then it totally plateaued. And they were like, there is a demand here, it delivers on taste, people are really excited by this, but it's not getting the cut through they want. So they brought in a psychologist who went, take the powdered egg out the mix. So all of a sudden, you just had people who went, same thing, you add the water to the cake mix, but you add an egg. And the process of adding an egg, system update, okay. Made people, don't know what I've done here, sorry. I mean, my computer skills are bad at the best of times, so let's just click this big red X. Oh, shit, sorry. Yeah. So I've downloaded some malware onto your computer, I apologize.
Great, but at last day, nothing else has gone wrong. And I went, no, do not say that.
Thank you very much. Yay. So the revelation was, as soon as people added the egg, they felt ownership of it. They felt like they had baked the cake. And it massively took off. This then boomed. So the adverts was really around centering on this. It's the idea that you made it yourself. And it's this wonderful example of just slight shift in psychology, just a reframing. And that's what the kind of request is around this. This is the request to kind of everybody in the room. So it is about pushing. You know, yes, of course, like we need to continue these wonderful examples of how do we look at our waste? How do we look at the amazing systems that support us upstream and downstream? But it's also about celebrating the fringes. If you don't think food can change the world, you've clearly never seen how an indigenous dish has pervaded despite colonialism or whitewashing, or how something like avocado toast can be blamed for the next generation not being able to buy a house. So we're in Denmark. And I remember being at an event for the Guild of Food Writers, and they invited the Danish Food Board across to speak to us, and they spoke to us about gastrotourism. And they had changed their national agenda of tourism. So big sway in a major a body that's talking huge amounts of money, because they knew people were visiting the country just to eat at Noma. And they were coming in, they would obviously travel around, they would go eat in other places, and it would cause, much like the distilleries that we're talking about in these rural communities, it would cause a huge ripple effect. So we can set fashions, we can reframe focuses. So what do we really do when we cook or pour or host? It's not really simply about just putting things in a product in front of people. We can affect the narratives that do shape the world, and we can set things up that really create sustainable actions. Instead of surgeons, we can be connectors. We can be the conduit between farmers and consumers, enabling the important dynamics that need to flow bilaterally between them. Good literature isn't just about good writing. It's also about good reading. You need to have that push from both sides to rise to meet each other. Governments are really slow to educate about food. I don't know if it's the same in Denmark, but growing up in the UK, there was nothing on it. You weren't taught about our tastes. You weren't even taught about kind of where our food came from. You still have people in the kind of like modern day who don't know the connections between the meat they eat and the animals it comes from. And that's a responsibility that we all have. So we can do some of that ourselves. We can take ownership of that education. So I spoke at Mad Symposium about the idea of a new social contract theory around food. How do we change the dynamic and the responsibility that we have? So the idea is we are this is important. We have the opportunity to, we're the middle ground between so many things. We connect from farmers and we connect to consumers. Now, often we listen to kind of both sides and we change what we do accordingly. But often there shouldn't be the fact that kind of the consumer is changing what the farmer grows. The farmer needs to be able to help bring their expertise to the table and talk about what is important from a balanced, sustainable point of view. We need to be able to connect and excite the consumer about that fact. The idea of asparagus year-round or strawberries totally out of season is something that's been dictated to in a disproportionate manner, and it's not healthy. None of us want to be buying milk for less than it costs the farmer to produce. So those pressures need to be balanced out. They need to come from a bilateral movement. And this is how we can shape what we value and what we focus on to both feed people, and that should be all people, but also make them happy and actually be in tune with nature, not against it. So this is a slide that I put up in every single talk that we do in the Lion family. And actually it's Alex, who's kind of big boss of all things Lion. He talks about it as being like our almost de facto tagline, which is heaps mad shit. It's kind of the thing that we like to do as a company. And he talks about the fact that your brain recognizes every element on this picture, but can't work out why they're all together. But the way that I look at it is, to me, it's a representation of the internet. And the internet, to me, is humankind's greatest invention. Not only is it a connector and an opportunity to be able to talk to different people around the world, so many of us were using this as the only connector over the last 2 years. And it's been something that's allowed us to connect. We've worked with material scientists in Australia, we've worked with microbiologists in the US, just by being able to use the internet as a connection piece. But it's also our output. It's the opportunity to promote these things. So yes, of course, we're all talking about things that are delicious, and to understand it's delicious, that can only be done by tasting it. But at the same time, all of the products that we create, that we talk about, that we convey, do more than that deliciousness. They channel stories, they channel really important human elements that we need to promote. And that's where I'm kind of going back to this idea of the magic. So to be sustainable, the education around it will save the world. And the way to do that is to keep it weird. So that's my, yeah, thank you.
Just keep that up there.
I'll leave you with that one.
I was sincerely hoping you were going to have that slide. Ryan, thank you as ever. I told you it was going to be provocative, Let's have a conference about sustainability. Let's not talk about sustainability, Okay, we'll have a quick break, a little comfort break, but don't go away because we're a little bit tight for time. Kieran needs to get his plane and stuff, so maybe just 5-10 minutes. Get yourselves a coffee, relax, and we'll be back and have a wee discussion.